It was a quiet, rainy evening in the city. The streets were wet, and the rain had been falling for hours, making the world seem darker and colder than usual. Jonas, a man in his 30s, had just finished his shift at the library. It had been a long day, filled with the smell of old books and the quiet rustle of pages turning. After hours of organizing, shelving, and helping patrons, he was eager to go home and relax. He pulled his coat tightly around him, trying to stay warm as he stepped out of the library and into the downpour. The cold rain hit his face like tiny needles, making him pull his hood up as he hurried down the street toward his car. The city seemed empty, almost deserted, with only the sound of raindrops splashing on the pavement and the distant hum of traffic. The streetlights flickered in the dark, casting pools of yellow light on the wet ground. As he walked, Jonas noticed something strange. Across the street, under the glow of a street lamp, there was a figure standing perfectly still. A woman. At first, he thought she might be waiting for a bus, or maybe lost. But when he looked more closely, he realized that she was just standing there, drenched in the rain, not moving at all. Jonas slowed down. Something about the girl struck him as odd. She wasn't like anyone he had seen before. Her skin glowed faintly, almost as if it was made of light, and her hair shimmered with a silver hue, catching the dim light of the street lamp. She seemed delicate, almost fragile, like something from another world. The rain fell around her, but she didn't seem to notice, her eyes fixed upward as if she were staring at something far beyond the clouds. For a moment, Jonas thought about walking past her. Maybe she was just waiting for someone, or perhaps she was just caught in the storm like everyone else. But then, he saw her shiver slightly, as though the cold was getting to her, and something inside him made him stop. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way she looked so out of place in the middle of the street, or maybe it was the way she seemed lost, like she didn't belong there at all. Whatever it was, Jonas felt a pull, a need to help her. He took a few steps forward and called out to her. "Hey! Are you okay?" The girl didn't respond right away. Instead, she slowly turned her head toward him, her wide eyes catching the light in a way that made Jonas feel uneasy, though not in a bad way, more like he was standing in the presence of something mysterious. She didn't seem frightened, but there was a hint of confusion in her gaze, as if she didn't understand the question. "Are you lost?" Jonas asked again, stepping closer. He was still cautious, unsure if she was simply a stranger caught in the rain or if something was wrong. The girl didn't speak at first, but her lips parted, as though she was trying to say something. Her voice, when it finally came, was soft and a little shaky, but it was also strangely melodic, like a song from another world. I don't know." Jonas frowned. "You don't know?" She nodded slowly, her silver hair moving gently in the wind. It was clear that she wasn't entirely sure where she was or what was going on. Jonas couldn't help but feel a strange connection with her. She looked so vulnerable, standing there in the rain, her clothes soaked through and her body trembling slightly. He glanced around quickly, realizing there was no one else in sight. The streets were empty, and the storm showed no sign of letting up. He couldn't just leave her there, she was in trouble, and no one else was around to help. His mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. He didn't know anything about her or where she came from, but one thing was certain, she needed help. Without thinking twice, Jonas stepped closer and held out his hand. "Come on. Let's get you out of the rain. You're freezing." The girl looked at his hand for a moment, uncertain, but then she slowly took it. Her touch was cool, almost like touching something made of ice, and it sent a strange chill through Jonas. Despite that, he gently guided her to the nearby bus stop, where there was a roof overhang that would keep them both dry. Once they were under the shelter, the girl seemed to relax a little, though she still didn't speak. She just stared at Jonas with those wide, curious eyes, as if trying to figure him out. Jonas took a step back, giving her some space. "You're safe now," he said, trying to reassure her. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated, her gaze flickering for a moment. She looked down at the ground as if trying to collect her thoughts, and for a second, Jonas thought she might not answer. But then, her voice came again, soft and hesitant. I don't have a name here. Jonas blinked, confused. You don't have a name? She shook her head. I don't know. I don't remember. I don't know where I'm from. The words hung in the air, and Jonas felt a knot form in his stomach. She didn't know where she was from. That didn't make sense. Maybe she was just in shock from the storm, or maybe something else was going on. But the longer he stood there, the more certain he became, this girl was different. She wasn't just some lost stranger. Where are you from, then? Jonas asked, trying to understand. The girl finally turned to him, her expression a mix of confusion and something else, something Jonas couldn't quite place. I am not from here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how I ended up here, but I'm not from Earth. Jonas froze. She wasn't from Earth? That didn't make any sense. But looking at her, the strange way her skin shimmered in the rain, the way she stood so still and out of place, Jonas began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't lying. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was she joking? Or was something far stranger going on here? He didn't know, but one thing was certain. This encounter, this strange girl who didn't belong, was about to lead him into something he could never have imagined. The rain continued to fall, heavy and cold, making everything around them feel distant and muffled. Jonas stood there, staring at the girl, his heart beating a little faster as he tried to understand what she had just said. Not from here, he repeated under his breath. His mind was racing, trying to process the words, but nothing seemed to make sense. She couldn't be from another planet, could she? The girl just stood there, her eyes still fixed on him, as if she were waiting for him to say something more. But Jonas couldn't speak right away. There was something in the way she looked at him that made him feel uneasy, not in a scary way, but more like he was suddenly aware that he was involved in something much bigger than he had expected. He wasn't just helping a stranger anymore. No, this girl wasn't like anyone he had ever met before. The soft glow from her skin continued to flicker, casting gentle, almost ethereal light around the small bus stop where they had taken shelter from the storm. It wasn't bright enough to be truly visible to anyone from a distance, but it was noticeable enough for Jonas to wonder how she was even able to glow like that. He had never seen anything like it. Still, she didn't speak. The girl simply watched him, her head tilted slightly, like she was studying him. It was strange. Her silence was almost loud in the quiet rain. They stood there in that strange stillness, neither of them saying anything, and it felt like the whole world had paused around them. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was an eerie kind of quiet, like a moment frozen in time. Jonas shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to standing around with someone and not knowing what to say. He usually knew what to do in situations like this: help a person, ask if they were okay, offer some kind of reassurance. But this was different. This girl didn't need help in the way he was used to. She was different in ways Jonas couldn't even begin to understand. Do you want to talk about where you're from? Jonas finally asked, his voice a little uncertain. He wasn't sure if she would answer, or if she even understood what he was asking. The girl blinked slowly, as if considering his question. She didn't immediately answer, though. She looked down at the ground, lost in thought, her fingers moving nervously against the wet fabric of her strange, shimmering clothes. For a long moment, she seemed to be debating something within herself. Her silence was unsettling, as if there were things she wanted to say but couldn't. Or maybe, Jonas thought, she just didn't know how to explain. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke again. But this time, her voice was even softer, like she was afraid to speak too loudly. I don't know how to explain, she whispered. I don't remember anything. I don't remember how I got here. I only know that I'm not from here. Jonas felt his breath catch in his throat. He had expected some kind of answer, but this wasn't what he had imagined. No memories. No understanding of how she ended up here. That was something entirely different. It was almost like she had been dropped into this world without knowing why or how, like she had no history, no identity. How was that possible? He glanced at her, trying to understand what she meant. Her wide, silver eyes stared at him, but there was a sadness behind them, something Jonas could feel even though she hadn't said much. It was the sadness of someone who didn't know who they were or how they got to where they were. It was a loneliness that Jonas couldn't ignore. I don't know what to do, Jonas said quietly, more to himself than to her. You're telling me you're not from Earth, but you don't remember anything about where you came from? He shook his head in disbelief. That doesn't make any sense. The girl's eyes flickered, and she nodded slowly. It's hard for me to understand, too, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm lost, and I don't know where to go. Jonas didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to dealing with situations like this, and the whole thing seemed too unbelievable to be real. A girl who wasn't from Earth. A girl who couldn't remember anything. He was struggling to keep up with the strange turn his life had taken in just the past few minutes. As the rain continued to fall, Jonas sat down on the bench beside her, trying to figure out what to do next. He wanted to help her, but how could he help someone who didn't even know where they were from? It wasn't like he had any answers to give her. The bus stop was silent again, the only sound the steady patter of the rain. Jonas couldn't stop glancing at the girl, his thoughts spinning in circles. He tried to imagine what it must be like to have no memories, to not know who you were, or where you came from. It was a kind of loneliness he couldn't even begin to comprehend. And yet, the girl seemed strangely calm, despite her confusion. After a long pause, Jonas broke the silence again. Do you have a name? He asked softly, feeling like he needed to ask something, anything that could make sense of what was happening. The girl's face seemed to soften at the question, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at her hands, almost as if she were searching for something deep inside her mind. Finally, she sighed and shook her head. I don't know, she said, her voice tinged with a kind of quiet frustration. I don't remember my name. I don't even know if I had one where I'm from. Jonas's heart ached for her. A person with no name. No past. It seemed impossible. How could anyone live without knowing who they were, without remembering where they came from? The more he thought about it, the more it disturbed him. He couldn't imagine waking up one day with no memory, no identity, and no clue as to why you were somewhere you didn't belong. For a moment, they both sat in silence, letting the rain wash over them. Jonas didn't know what to say next. It felt like the rain was washing away everything around them, leaving only the two of them alone in this strange moment. Everything seemed unreal, as if this was some kind of dream Jonas couldn't wake up from. Finally, the girl spoke again, her voice so quiet that Jonas had to lean in closer to hear her. I don't know how to get back, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know how to go home. Jonas's heart sank. He didn't know what she meant by home or where she was trying to go, but the sadness in her voice was undeniable. He wanted to say something comforting, something that would make her feel less alone, but the words wouldn't come. What could he say to someone who didn't even know where they were from, or how to get back? The rain continued to fall, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. They sat together in the dark, listening to the storm, caught in a silence that felt heavier than the rain itself. And in that silence, Jonas realized something. He wasn't just helping her anymore. He was becoming part of her story, whether he wanted to or not. The rain was still falling, but the girl and Jonas seemed to have forgotten about it entirely. The air around them felt different now, heavier somehow, as though they were in the middle of something important. Jonas couldn't stop thinking about what she had said, she wasn't from Earth. His mind kept racing, trying to make sense of her words. Was she telling the truth? How could someone from another planet just end up in the middle of a rainy street in his city? He glanced at the girl, who was still sitting beside him on the bench, her eyes looking distant and lost. Her glowing skin was now faintly pulsing, like a soft heartbeat that seemed to match the rhythm of the rain falling around them. She didn't look scared or upset, but there was a kind of sadness in her expression, something Jonas couldn't ignore. He had to know more. He couldn't just leave things like this, not when he had so many questions. "How did you end up here?" he asked gently, his voice breaking the silence that had settled between them. The girl turned to look at him, her eyes wide and thoughtful. "I don't know," she whispered, almost like she was speaking to herself. "I just woke up, and I was here. But it wasn't like this place. It wasn't like anything I know. I don't even know how I got here, or why." Jonas nodded, trying to process what she was saying. It was hard to understand, but there was a certain sincerity in her voice that made him want to believe her. Her words didn't sound like a story made up on the spot. She seemed confused, but not lying. He sat silently for a few moments, considering her words. If she was telling the truth, if she really wasn't from Earth, then she could be in real danger. What if she had ended up here by accident? What if someone was looking for her? Jonas didn't know what kind of help he could give, but he knew he had to do something. He couldn't just walk away and pretend he hadn't heard what she had said. "Do you remember anything about where you came from?" he asked, hoping for some clue that could help her understand what was going on. The girl looked down at her hands, her fingers still trembling slightly. She seemed to be thinking hard, as though she was trying to remember something that was just out of reach. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, slowly, her head lifted, and she looked at Jonas again, her expression more focused than it had been before. "I remember, a place," she said, her voice trembling. "It wasn't Earth. It was, bright. So bright. The sky was different there, not like this. There were no clouds, and the sun was so big, it looked like it could touch you. The ground wasn't made of dirt and stone. It was smooth, like glass. And the air felt alive. It wasn't heavy like the air here. It felt light, like you could breathe it forever." Jonas listened intently, hanging on to every word. He had no idea what she was talking about, but it sounded like a place from a dream, something impossible, something that didn't belong on Earth. "Then what happened?" Jonas asked, his curiosity growing. "What made you leave that place?" The girl's face became clouded with sadness. "I don't know," she said softly. "I didn't mean to leave. It wasn't my choice. But, something happened. I think I was taken." Jonas felt his heart race. Taken? What did she mean? Who could have taken her from a place like the one she described? "What do you mean, taken?" he pressed. "By who?" The girl shook her head slowly, her eyes closing briefly as if trying to shut out the painful memory. "I don't know. I remember bright lights, and then I woke up here. I don't know how or why, but I'm not supposed to be here. I know that much." Jonas was stunned. This wasn't some wild imagination or a crazy story. The way she spoke about it, the way she remembered those details, he could tell she wasn't making it up. He had no idea what kind of world she was talking about, but it was clear that she didn't belong here. And someone, or something, had brought her to Earth. But why? And how? He looked at her, feeling a deep sense of sympathy. She looked so small, so fragile, sitting there in the rain, a stranger in a world she didn't understand. But Jonas knew that he couldn't just leave her like this. He had to help her figure out what had happened, even if he didn't know where to start. "I believe you," Jonas said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. "But we need to figure out what happened to you. We need to find out how you got here and what you can do to get back home." The girl nodded slowly, though her expression remained uncertain. "I don't know if I can get back," she said softly. I don't know if there's even a way back. But I want to try. Jonas felt a rush of determination. If she was trying to get home, then he had to help her, no matter what. He couldn't just walk away from someone who needed him. Maybe he didn't have all the answers, but he could at least try. Okay, he said, his voice steady. We'll figure it out together. You don't have to do this alone. The girl gave him a small, grateful smile, though it didn't reach her eyes completely. She still looked lost, unsure, like she was carrying a heavy burden that she didn't know how to shake. But for the first time since they had met, Jonas felt like she wasn't quite so alone. They sat there in silence for a while, watching the rain fall around them, each lost in their own thoughts. Jonas kept wondering what kind of world she had come from, and what kind of beings lived there. Was she the only one who had been brought here, or were there others like her? And why had she been brought here in the first place? As the minutes passed, the girl's eyes grew more distant again, like she was remembering something more. Jonas didn't press her for more information, not yet. He wanted her to feel comfortable talking to him, but he knew there was something more to her story, something she hadn't shared yet. It wasn't the kind of thing someone could say all at once. It was too big, too strange. Finally, the girl spoke again, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. I'm scared, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know if I'll ever find my way home. Jonas turned to her, his heart going out to her. You will, he said softly, more to reassure himself than her. We'll figure this out. Together. She nodded slowly, but Jonas could see the doubt in her eyes. The uncertainty. But there was also a spark of hope, a glimmer that maybe, just maybe, she believed that things could be different. He had to make sure that hope stayed alive. The rain continued to pour, but now, it didn't seem as heavy. It felt almost like the start of something new, a beginning for both of them. Whatever was waiting ahead, Jonas knew one thing for sure, he wasn't going to let this girl face it alone. They had a journey ahead of them, and he wasn't going to walk away. Not now. Not ever. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, but the night still felt heavy with mystery. Jonas and the girl sat in silence, the world around them quiet except for the soft sound of raindrops hitting the pavement. The city, with its busy streets and neon lights, seemed so far away now. The only thing that mattered was the girl beside him. Her words echoed in Jonas's mind, she wasn't from Earth, and she had no idea how she had gotten here. But despite all her confusion and fear, she seemed to trust him, and that was something Jonas couldn't ignore. He had to help her. They sat for what felt like hours, each of them lost in thought. The girl, still wrapped in her glowing, strange clothes, had her head down, her hands resting in her lap, as if she were trying to gather the courage to speak again. Jonas wanted to ask her more questions, but he didn't know where to start. Every question he had led to more confusion. He couldn't make sense of anything yet, but he was determined to help her find the answers she was looking for. Suddenly, there was a soft, strange hum, like the sound of something powering up. It was so faint at first that Jonas thought he might have imagined it, but then it grew louder, coming from the girl herself. He turned to look at her, and that's when he saw it, the faint, blue light surrounding her, a soft glow that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just her clothes glowing anymore. It was as if something inside her was starting to wake up, and it was making her shine brighter. The girl's eyes widened, and she looked around, as if searching for the source of the sound. Her face was filled with a mix of fear and confusion. What is happening? She whispered, her voice shaking. Jonas felt his heart race. He had no idea what was going on, but he couldn't ignore the way the air around them felt charged, like something powerful was building up. The humming sound grew louder, and suddenly, with a burst of light, a hologram appeared in front of them. The hologram was a shimmering figure, floating in the air, just a few feet away from them. It was a tall, humanoid figure, but it wasn't like a human. The figure was made of light, glowing with soft blues and greens that shifted in waves. It had no face, no features to make it seem like it was alive, but it was unmistakably real. The moment Jonas saw it, he felt his breath catch in his throat. It wasn't just some light show or illusion. This was something else. The girl gasped, her body stiffening. No. No, this can't be real, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The hologram flickered, and then a voice, deep and metallic, echoed from the figure. Astra, you are needed. Jonas turned to the girl, his eyes wide with shock. Astra? Is that your name? He asked, barely able to process what was happening. The girl's eyes locked onto the hologram, her expression a mix of disbelief and fear. She nodded slowly, almost as if she were afraid to say it aloud. Yes, but it's not just a name, she said, her voice trembling. It's who I am. Or, at least, who I was. She looked at Jonas, her silver eyes filled with uncertainty. Astra it's not just a name from where I came from. It's my identity. My purpose. The hologram's voice interrupted, as if it were impatient with the delay. Astra, your mission is incomplete. You must return. Time is running out. Jonas's mind was spinning. He had so many questions, but the words caught in his throat. This wasn't just a girl who had somehow ended up on Earth, this was someone with a mission, someone who had a purpose, a reason for being here. But why had she forgotten all of this? Why didn't she remember who she was or why she was here? Astra, listen to me, the hologram continued, its voice cold and commanding. You are needed. The fate of your world depends on your return. Astra's face twisted with confusion. I don't understand. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice soft but filled with desperation. I don't even know how I ended up here. I don't even remember my mission. How can I go back when I don't know how I got here or what I'm supposed to do? The hologram flickered again, its form shifting slightly, as if struggling to maintain its shape. The coordinates are locked. The system malfunctioned. You must find the signal. You must return to the source. Astra shook her head, her eyes welling up with tears. I don't know how to do that. I can't remember. I'm lost. Jonas could see the pain in her eyes, the frustration of someone who had been thrust into a situation far beyond their control. He didn't know what this mission was, or what it meant for Astra to return, but he knew one thing for sure, she wasn't alone in this. Whatever it took, Jonas would help her find the answers. He turned back to the hologram, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. What do you mean by the signal? He asked. How can we find it? The hologram's form shimmered, and for a brief moment, it looked almost as if it were considering Jonas's question. The signal is not of your world. It is embedded in Astra's mind. But it is locked. You must help her unlock it. Jonas's heart skipped a beat. Unlock it? How do we do that? He asked, his mind racing. He was no expert in anything related to aliens or holograms, but if there was a way to help Astra, help her find her way back, help her remember, then he had to find it. The hologram seemed to pause, and for a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of its presence. Then, the voice spoke again, its tone more serious than before. You must travel to the source of the disturbance, it said, its words filled with an urgency that sent a chill down Jonas's spine. Astra's memory is tied to the coordinates. She must remember, before it is too late. What disturbance? What coordinates? Jonas pressed, feeling both overwhelmed and determined to get answers. The hologram flickered once more, and with that, it began to fade. Time is short, it said, its voice fading into static. Astra's journey is far from over. And then, just like that, the hologram disappeared, leaving Jonas and Astra alone once again in the quiet, rainy night. The only sound left was the distant rumble of thunder as it rolled across the sky. The girl beside him seemed lost, her eyes distant, her body trembling slightly. Jonas turned to her, his voice softer now, filled with concern. "Astra, are you okay?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat there, silent, trying to process everything. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but filled with a newfound determination. "I have to find the source," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I have to remember. I have to finish what I started." Jonas nodded, his resolve hardening. Whatever it took, he would help her. They had no idea what kind of journey lay ahead, but together, they would face it. They didn't have all the answers yet, but Jonas knew that they would find them. And with Astra's mission still unclear, one thing was certain: this was only the beginning. The city around them felt colder now. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy with the mystery of what had just happened. The glowing image of the hologram, its voice still echoing in Jonas's mind, lingered like a warning. Astra, the girl he had only just met, had a mission, a purpose, and somehow, she was tied to something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. But she had no memory of what she was supposed to do, no clear idea of how to unlock the answers she needed. Jonas couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility for her. She was scared, lost, and confused, and now it seemed that her mission was even more complicated than he had thought. Astra had to return to a place she couldn't even remember, to a life that felt like a distant dream. She didn't even understand what had happened to her, and he couldn't imagine what it was like to be stuck between two worlds, not belonging to either one. The girl beside him stared at the empty space where the hologram had just been, her silver eyes wide and filled with uncertainty. She looked fragile, like someone who had just been told the world was ending but didn't know how to stop it. Astra didn't look like the powerful being the hologram had described, someone with a mission to save a world. She looked lost, broken, like someone who had just been swept away by a force beyond her control. Jonas felt a pang of sympathy for her. She had trusted him, let him in with the details of her strange story. He couldn't just walk away. No matter how impossible it seemed, he had to help her. "Astra," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence between them, "we'll figure this out. I don't know what's going on, but we can work together. We can find the answers." Astra turned to him slowly, her face filled with doubt. "But I don't remember anything," she whispered. "How can I be sure I'm supposed to do anything? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm not who they think I am?" Jonas met her gaze, his eyes full of reassurance. "You're not alone," he said firmly. "We can figure this out together. You don't have to do it all on your own." For the first time since they had met, Astra's face softened. There was a flicker of hope in her eyes, though she didn't quite believe it yet. She didn't understand everything that had happened, and neither did Jonas. But something told him that they were meant to be here, together. Maybe, just maybe, they could help each other find the truth. The girl was still quiet, her expression distant. She seemed to be lost in thought, her brow furrowed as she tried to make sense of everything. Jonas waited, giving her the space she needed, knowing that she was trying to piece together the parts of her life that felt so disconnected. After a long pause, Astra finally spoke, her voice small but steady. "I don't know how to explain it, but I feel something. Like there's something inside me, trying to connect to something else. Like, a part of me is missing." Jonas's heart skipped a beat. He had wondered if she had felt it too. The strange connection between them, a bond that seemed to exist without explanation. He couldn't help but wonder if this was the key, the missing link between her world and his. Could the connection they shared be the thing that would help her remember, help her unlock the path back to where she belonged? "I feel it too," Jonas said, his voice quiet but sure. "It's like there's something pulling me toward you, pulling us toward something. I don't know what it is, but I feel like we're supposed to find it." Astra looked at him, her silver eyes searching his face, as if trying to understand what he meant. "You do?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. Jonas nodded. I don't know why, but I feel like we're connected. Like whatever's happening with you, it's also happening to me. For a moment, there was a strange stillness between them. It was as though the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The weight of their conversation, the uncertainty about what was really going on, hung in the air like an invisible thread tying them together. Astra's face softened as she thought about what Jonas had said. Maybe it's not just me, she whispered. Maybe there's something about you too. Something about us. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel it too. You're right. We're connected somehow. And maybe that's why I ended up here. Maybe we're supposed to do this together. Jonas smiled slightly, a mix of relief and hope flooding through him. It wasn't just her mission anymore, it was their mission. They had something in common now, a shared purpose that tied them together in ways that neither of them fully understood. But it was a start. And sometimes, that was enough. What now? Jonas asked, his voice soft but filled with determination. Astra shook her head slowly. I don't know yet. But the connection, it's stronger now. I can feel it. There's something out there, something I'm supposed to find. I can't remember what it is, but I know it's real. Jonas looked around, his mind spinning with possibilities. Could the signal the hologram had mentioned be a part of this connection? Was it leading them somewhere? The idea of being able to help Astra remember, to unlock the answers she needed, made his heart race. But what did it all mean? And where were they supposed to go? Maybe we need to find a place to start, Jonas suggested. Maybe there's something here, something nearby, that can help us figure out what's going on. Astra nodded, her silver eyes narrowing as if trying to focus on something far away. Yes, she said softly. A place. A signal. It's all connected. They stood up together, their eyes meeting with a shared understanding. It was clear that whatever was happening, whatever had brought Astra to Earth, it was part of something bigger. And now, they had to find the pieces that would make it all fall into place. Jonas didn't know where this path would lead them, but he knew that they couldn't walk it alone. Whatever they faced, whatever challenges came their way, they would face it together. And that was enough. As they started walking into the city, a sense of purpose filled the air. The connection between them was stronger now, a bond that neither of them could fully explain, but one that they knew was real. The road ahead was uncertain, but they would walk it side by side, united by something neither of them could ignore. The streets of the city stretched out before Jonas and Astra as they walked together, the sky above them now clear of rain but still holding a quiet, lingering tension. The soft glow of neon lights lit up the sidewalks, casting long shadows that seemed to dance as they moved. Astra walked beside Jonas, her silver eyes scanning the surroundings as if searching for something, anything, that could give her the answers she desperately needed. Jonas, on the other hand, felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. He had no idea what he was doing. They had no plan, no clear destination, but something inside him told him they were going in the right direction. There was a pull between him and Astra, a force that seemed to guide them even though neither of them knew what it meant. He couldn't ignore it. It was like the invisible thread that had bound them together the moment they met, and now it was leading them towards something important. The city felt strangely empty despite its busy lights and bustling streets. It was almost as if the world around them was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. There were no signs of danger, no obvious threats, but there was a sense of unease in the air, a feeling that something out of the ordinary was about to happen. Suddenly, Astra stopped walking, her hand shooting out to grab Jonas's arm. "Did you feel that?" she asked, her voice filled with urgency. Jonas looked at her, confused. "Feel what? What's wrong?" Astra's eyes were wide, her gaze fixed on something in the distance, just beyond the reach of the streetlights. Jonas followed her line of sight but saw nothing unusual. The streets were empty, the buildings silent. It was just an ordinary night, at least, that's what it looked like on the surface. But then Jonas felt it. A strange, almost electric sensation washed over him, like a sudden jolt of energy shooting through the air. His heart raced, and he felt an odd pressure build in his chest. It was the same feeling he had experienced earlier when the hologram appeared, and when Astra had first looked at him with her wide, uncertain eyes. But this time, it was stronger, more intense, as if the very air around them was charged with an unknown force. Astra looked at him, her silver eyes flickering with recognition. "It's here," she whispered. "The power. It's coming from that direction." Jonas turned to look in the direction Astra was pointing. There was nothing there, no strange light, no sign of anything out of the ordinary, but the feeling in the air was undeniable. It was like the city itself was humming with energy, and it was coming from somewhere just ahead of them. Without saying another word, Astra began walking toward it. Her steps were quick, almost urgent, as if something was calling to her. Jonas hesitated for a moment, his instincts telling him to be cautious, but the pull between him and Astra was too strong. He had no choice but to follow. They walked in silence for several minutes, moving deeper into the heart of the city. The streets were quieter now, and the buildings seemed to close in around them. The world felt smaller, more contained, as if they were moving into an entirely different place, one that wasn't quite part of the world they knew. It was as if they were walking toward a doorway, though neither of them knew where it would lead. Astra's pace quickened as they turned a corner, and Jonas could feel the energy growing stronger with every step they took. The pressure in his chest increased, making it hard to breathe. It felt like the world around them was shifting, as if reality itself were bending in strange ways. The air shimmered, and for a split second, Jonas thought he saw a ripple, like heat rising off the ground on a summer day. But when he blinked, it was gone. Finally, they reached the end of the street. There, standing before them, was an old, abandoned building. It looked like something out of a forgotten time, with cracked windows, peeling paint, and an air of decay hanging over it. The door was slightly ajar, as if it had been waiting for them. "This is it," Astra said softly, her voice full of awe and fear. "I can feel it. The power, it's inside." Jonas stared at the building, feeling a chill run down his spine. Something about it seemed wrong. It was as if the building itself was alive, breathing in a way that felt unnatural. The energy pulsed from within, drawing them closer. It wasn't just a building, it was a doorway, a threshold between the ordinary world and something far more mysterious. Astra stepped forward without hesitation, her hand outstretched toward the door. Jonas followed, his heart pounding in his chest. As they crossed the threshold, the world around them seemed to change. The air grew colder, and the hum of energy became louder, almost deafening. It was as though the building itself was alive with power, and it was reaching out to them, pulling them in. Inside, the building was dark, its walls covered in shadows. The only light came from a strange, flickering glow in the center of the room. As they walked toward it, Jonas could feel the energy intensifying, pressing against him from all sides. It was as if the very air was charged with electricity, and it was all focused on Astra. At the center of the room, on a pedestal, was a small, glowing orb. It was no larger than a baseball, but the light it emitted was so bright that it illuminated the entire room, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. The orb pulsed with energy, each beat sending a shockwave of power through the room. Astra stopped in front of it, her eyes wide with wonder. This is it," she said, her voice trembling. "This is what I've been searching for." Jonas stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the orb. It was beautiful, almost hypnotic, but there was something about it that felt dangerous. He could feel the power radiating off of it, and it was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was as if it had a life of its own, waiting to be awakened. Suddenly, Astra reached out and touched the orb. The moment her fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through the room, and Jonas stumbled back, feeling like he had been struck by lightning. The room seemed to explode with light and sound, and for a moment, everything went white. When the light finally faded, Jonas found himself lying on the ground, disoriented and breathless. Astra was kneeling beside him, her face pale and wide-eyed. The orb was no longer glowing, it was dark now, almost as if it had lost its power. What just happened? Jonas gasped, still trying to catch his breath. Astra looked down at her hands, which were trembling. I don't know, she whispered. I think I activated something. But what was it? Jonas slowly pushed himself up, his heart racing. The room was silent now, the strange energy gone. But there was no mistaking the feeling that something had shifted. They had just unlocked something that was tied to Astra's past, to her mission, and to whatever had brought her to Earth in the first place. What now? Jonas asked, his voice shaky. Astra looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. Now, we figure out what this power is, and what it means for both of us. As they stood together, they both felt a shift in the air, a feeling that the journey was far from over. This was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that neither of them could yet fully understand. Jonas and Astra stood in the dark, silent room, the remnants of the strange energy still lingering in the air around them. The glow of the orb had faded, leaving only shadows in its place. Astra's hand trembled as she pulled it away from the pedestal, and Jonas could see the confusion and worry in her silver eyes. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them, as if something monumental had just happened, but neither of them knew exactly what it meant. What did you do? Jonas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The room felt heavier now, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Astra looked down at the orb, then back at him, her face pale. I didn't mean to, she whispered. I felt like I had to touch it. Like it was calling me, and when I did, everything changed. But I don't understand. Why did it go dark? Jonas stepped closer to her, trying to make sense of what had just unfolded. The moment Astra touched the orb, he had felt it too, a wave of energy that nearly knocked him off his feet. The strange hum in the room, the pulsating light, it all had felt so powerful, so full of potential. And yet, now the orb was silent, its light gone, as if nothing had ever happened. It's like it was waiting for something, Jonas said, more to himself than to Astra. Maybe we triggered something. Or maybe we weren't supposed to. But before Astra could respond, the air around them shifted. There was a sudden, sharp sound, a low hum that vibrated in the walls, followed by a loud crack, like thunder, but it came from inside the building. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Jonas instinctively grabbed Astra's arm, pulling her away from the pedestal. What was that? Astra asked, her voice tight with fear. I don't know, Jonas answered, his mind racing. But I think we've just done something that wasn't meant to happen. The room seemed to come alive. The shadows on the walls flickered, and a strange energy filled the air, almost like the room itself was waking up. The hum grew louder, vibrating in the very air they breathed, and it seemed to be coming from everywhere. Suddenly, the walls of the building began to shift. It was subtle at first, like a slight tremor in the floor, but then the walls cracked open, revealing strange, glowing symbols etched into the stone. The symbols pulsed with light, almost as if they were reacting to something that Jonas and Astra had unknowingly triggered. Astra's eyes widened with a mixture of awe and fear. This place, it's alive, isn't it? Jonas nodded, his heart racing. He had no idea what was happening, but one thing was clear, they had unleashed something ancient and powerful, and now they had to face the consequences. Before they could react, a voice rang out in the room. It was deep and resonant, almost as if it came from the walls themselves. You have awakened the power. Jonas and Astra turned around, looking for the source of the voice, but there was no one there. The voice wasn't coming from any one person, it seemed to be everywhere at once, echoing in the room, vibrating through the very walls. Astra took a step back, her eyes darting around. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "You do not understand," the voice continued, its tone unyielding. "The power you have awakened is not meant for your world. It was never meant to be disturbed." Jonas felt a cold shiver run down his spine. This wasn't just a random building with strange energy, it was something far older, something that had been waiting for the right moment to resurface. He could feel it now, the weight of its presence, like a storm on the horizon. What are you talking about?" Astra asked, her voice shaking. "What power? What is this place?" The voice didn't respond immediately, but there was a shift in the energy around them, a change in the air. Then, slowly, the symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, casting an eerie, pale light across the room. They twisted and turned, as if alive, and for the first time, Jonas felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched, of something powerful and ancient observing them. "It is a warning," the voice said, its tone now colder, more forceful. "You have disturbed the balance. You must leave now, before it is too late." Jonas's mind raced. What balance? What had they disturbed? He glanced at Astra, who was visibly shaken, her silver eyes wide with fear. "We can't just leave," Astra said, her voice rising with urgency. "I can't go back without understanding what this power is. I need to know why I'm here. Why I was brought here." The voice seemed to pause for a moment, almost as if it were considering her words. Then, a new sound filled the room, a low, rumbling growl, like the sound of something deep within the earth stirring. The walls shuddered again, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. This time, it was stronger, more violent, and Jonas could feel the room around them shifting. "You were not meant to awaken this power," the voice said, its tone dark and foreboding. "And now, you must face the consequences." A sudden flash of light burst from the center of the room, blinding Jonas and Astra. They both shielded their eyes, but the light was too intense. The air itself seemed to bend and twist around them, warping in strange ways. When the light finally faded, Jonas and Astra found themselves standing in a completely different place. The room they had been in was gone. Instead, they were now surrounded by a vast, open landscape. The ground beneath their feet was barren, cracked, and dry. The sky above was dark and stormy, filled with swirling clouds that seemed to pulse with energy. In the distance, a massive, crumbling structure loomed, a tower that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky, its silhouette jagged and ominous. What just happened?" Jonas gasped, his mind reeling. Astra looked around, her face pale, her silver eyes wide with shock. We're not in the same place anymore. Where are we?" The voice echoed again, its deep tone reverberating in the air. "You are in the heart of the power you awakened. The balance has been broken. Now, you must face the consequences of your actions." Jonas's heart pounded in his chest. They had been transported somewhere, someplace far from the city, and far from the life they knew. The power they had awakened wasn't just a simple object, it was something ancient and dangerous, something that had been waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. And now, they were in the middle of it. Astra turned to Jonas, her face filled with fear and determination. "We have to find out what this place is," she said, her voice steady. "We can't turn back now. There's too much at stake." Jonas nodded, his mind racing with questions, but one thing was certain, the twist in their journey had just begun. They weren't just running away from something now, they were being pulled into something much bigger, and they would have to face whatever it was head-on.